And really the issue is, I really believe, and tell me if you disagree, I really believe there's a looming storm out there, a gathering storm, a crisis that's building, facing folks who are approaching retirement or already in retirement. We have dealt with the question of how the baby boomers affect the economy since 1945. That's the first year that we started the baby boomer generation. And the baby boomer generation ended in 1963 or so. And I want you to think about 2 days. We know that in 2010, the first of the baby boomers started turning 65 years old and reaching retirement. And we hear that that's 10,000 baby boomers are reaching retirement at 65 a day. 2010. So that's 7 years ago. We have known that the baby boomer generation has consumed a large part of the economy, whether they're babies, or whether they're teenagers, or they're young driving adults, or they're young adults having kids, or they're whatever. All the way through. For decades we've known that the baby boomers are an issue that we've had to deal with as far as our nation's economy. Now, a lot of you folks aren't baby boomers. You were born before that generation. So this may not mean a whole lot to you, but I do think it contributes to a large degree to what the crisis is. This gathering storm has been building for decades, and very few people at the national level, either politicians, policymakers, or even the insurance industry, have done anything to effectively address it and give us peace of mind. Are you anxious about your future? Are you anxious about your health in the future, or what happens to your family or your family economics if you do require nursing home assisted living? Either in-home, assisted living at a lower care level, or full care nursing home. Are you worried about that and anxious? A lot of people are. Have you taken steps to protect your assets? Do you have sufficient long-term care insurance policy in place? When I talk about estate planning and that graph with those circles over there, everything we do in estate planning is asset protection to one degree or another. We're trying to preserve and protect your assets for your intentions, whatever they may be. And in this case, it's to try to prevent someone from taking those away from you. Whether you're forced to spend them on the care that you will receive and impoverish yourself or your family, or whether the state will come back and make a claim when you pass away against your estate. And so a lot of folks, they think, I never got my long-term care insurance. I don't know what to do or where to go. And some folks are just not going to qualify at this point. We'll get into that a little bit more. This is an important slide. I like to focus on it. It's going to appear a couple more times in the presentation. The reason why this is important is because as an attorney who offers these services and who has these resources, I can spend days talking about what we do and how we do it. You see how complicated that chart is over there that you have in your folder? That talks about the whats that we offer. And then there's a lot of hows, how we offer it, that go behind those whats. My goal today is not to try to educate you so that you understand all the technical issues that are involved in this topic. My goal is to help you understand what your concerns are, why you're here, why you're considering doing some planning, and whether we can help. We will cover some of the whats, and we will talk a little bit about the hows. But if I spent all my time talking about those technical aspects with you, you would walk away more confused than when you came in. And I don't want that. I really want this to provide a little more clarity than a lot more confusion. Inevitably, there'll be things that you don't understand and can't piece together. But remember, I just told you I've devoted 3 years already to refocusing our practice into these areas. And that's full time and a lot of money in our investments and systems and things like that. And in a couple hours or 90 minutes, it's going to be really hard for you to grab that much information. So, I'm asking you, and that's why we asked you to do the concerns assessment, I'm asking you to think as we go through my comments this morning, your why. What is it that keeps you awake at night? What are you anxious about? What have you experienced that you have unresolved? If you have unresolved issues, I suggest that it could be very helpful to you to have peace of mind to get some answers, maybe not today, but in further discussions, to get some answers and move forward. So we can try to close those issues and resolve those issues for you. So be thinking about your why. Why are you here? Why are you taking 2 hours out of a Saturday morning to come and learn about this? I do want to mention at this point the special report that we've either mailed to you or that you received this morning. And mentioned right here, this is where it intersects. When we talk about the crisis of long-term care, how it's provided and how it's funded. Does anybody here think, would you disagree with this comment? It's a total mess. Does anybody disagree with that? No. Great. So then the question is, how did it get here? Well, if you take time, if you want to, there's good background information that will share with you how we got here. And I'll talk about how Medicaid and Medicare came into law in 1965. And it's not really addressed in here, but if you even go back, the issue of public financing of health care for the elderly and for the poor goes all the way back to probably the 30s. And if you think about kind of the public policy of providing public health care funding, if you go back to the 30s, there's been a big push and desire to make us a little bit like Europe, like Britain with their National Health Service, or what's going on in Sweden over years, to try to provide an entitlement to everybody for health care as a right as opposed to a benefit. And wherever you fall in the spectrum on that topic, I'm not here to discuss that or debate that with you. I'm just saying that's kind of how it originated. And it led to what happened in 1965. And I've got a slide about that I'll address. But there's been a crisis that has been looming for so long. And I mentioned earlier that we've had so many people, policy leaders, politicians, and even the insurance industry, they have not forecast properly and they have not planned properly to provide retirement security and peace of mind to you, and economic security to you, or to me. They simply have let us down, in my view, so that you can retire with dignity and have retirement security. And what that means is, for most people, they feel like they have no options. They feel like there's nothing they can do to provide for their own retirement security and for their family other than sell everything. And let's talk about the insurance industry here. And in insurance, I'm talking particularly about the companies that write long-term care insurance policies. You've heard of that, right? Long-term care insurance. And that became very popular, especially in the 90s and the early 2000s, because that was the solution. I can remember Governor Rounds being on TV in the ad saying, buy the partner long-term care policies in South Dakota. Because he knew, and someone knew, that it's going to be a crisis, a financing crisis at the public level through government. Okay, I can tell you this. In the early 2000s, there were 100 insurance companies that wrote long-term care insurance policies. How many are there today? If you know. A dozen. A dozen companies. About 8 that write long-term care insurance policies for employer-sponsored programs. But for individual, it's about a dozen, down from 100. Policies are being rewritten. They're being changed. Companies are going into receivership. Companies have stopped writing policies. There are some that are out there that are good and still doing it. But a lot of companies just stopped writing. Why? Because the insurance industry was unprepared for people making claims. We're living longer. Are we living healthier? No, not necessarily. In another presentation that I give, just on estate planning without this topic attached to it, I talk about the statistics. How many people are suffering from different types of health issues, including Alzheimer's, dementia. I mean, we're living longer, but we're not living healthier, and more people are needing long-term care. We'll look at those numbers in just a little bit. And the insurance company made improper assumptions. They made improper assumptions about the return on their investment, about the number of people who would make the claims versus those who would pass away before they made the claims. All kinds of assumptions that they made. They didn't build in enough regular increases in the premiums, and they just started losing money. I learned recently that the company that I viewed as one of the biggest companies in the industry, Genworth, which used to be a GE company, Genworth, I always knew as the big dog in the long-term care insurance business. In the fall, the shareholders of Genworth approved the sale of the company to a Chinese insurance company. That deal closed in February. If you have a policy with Genworth, your policy is now owned by the Chinese. I have people come to my workshops and they say, I paid 20 years into a long-term care policy, and I get a letter from the state and it says, the terms are being rewritten, your company is out of business, and the state will provide some coverage but not what you agreed to in your contract. They rewrote it. The company went into receivership. That client is now in a pool in the state to cover some losses, but it's not as generous as what she had contracted for. The stories go on and on. You could used to get the policy on a more generous basis, and your qualifications were easier, and things were more certain, and the cost was more affordable, and that's becoming more and more difficult. If you don't have long-term care insurance now, I'm always encouraging you to evaluate that, to talk to an agent, to talk to somebody in the insurance business that can help you with that. I think that is a very good way to provide asset protection to cover the cost, but a lot of folks simply won't qualify. So then the question becomes, and I've addressed in the special report, what are some of the public policy proposals to try to reform the funding system at a national level, whether it's insurance or whether it's public financing through taxes and government benefits and things like that. I don't want to take time this morning to go over because we have so many other things we want to talk about. But please look at that report, and we do address some of those proposals that are out there. Now the question is whether it is sufficient. In my view, there is nothing yet that's been proposed that's going to make funding or financing long-term care for the average family more affordable. In fact, what we see is more shifting of the cost burden to the patients and families. If you look at what's been out there as a plan from the Republicans for health care reform, they've talked about when it comes to Medicaid in particular, instead of having a reimbursement for individual patients, as is the current system, just to give block grants to the states and let the states manage those dollars. That's all the states get. If they run out, they run out. That's all the federal government's going to get. Now, I'm not trying to say Republicans are not helping people. I mean, I'm pretty conservative. I'm just saying that's what's out there now. That there is a movement to shift more cost burden to families. So what we do is, I just want folks to say, when we say over here that most Americans believe they have no options, what we engage in is relationship building with the clients and communications to talk about individualized solutions, unique strategies that are available both at the state and federal level. Not only are they allowed, but they are encouraged. I'll show you a brochure that the Department of Social Services publishes. This is from DSS, and it says, the title is Medicaid Spousal Care Handbook, and the subtitle is Protecting Your Income and Assets. Even the state is encouraging people to protect assets and income. Now, they're not going to do it at the level that we do it as professionals. But a lot of folks say, how is it that we can try to protect assets and qualify for Medicaid, and there's something not wrong about that? Well, just look at this. Even the state encourages you to do that. The courts that deal with Medicaid, the regulations that deal with Medicaid, the agencies that deal with Medicaid, they recognize that the individualized strategies that we use are appropriate and even encouraged. Now, they're not going to tell you about them. They will only go so far to tell you about how to protect your income and assets, and then they'll stop.